Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to be here today with two fabulous industry professionals to open this year's Education Week of the Go West Summit. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Julie Heiser, and I work at the National Travel and Tourism Office at the U.S. Department of Commerce. I don't know about you, but instead of it being nearly March 2021, I feel like we're headed into the 15th month of 2020. But having said that, I'm very hopeful things are starting to move in the right direction. And we may actually have reason to think 2021 isn't going to be a total wash. Today's speakers are two of the reasons I think we can be hopeful. Karen Grunberg and Rosalina Barba-Stefano are going to spend the next 45 minutes with you guys, providing us all with the current state of international travel. However, before I let them take the reins and give you the benefit of their expertise, I'd like to take a minute to formally introduce them to you. Karen Grunberg is Senior Vice President, Partner Marketing and Strategic Alliances at BrandUSA. For those of you who may not be familiar with BrandUSA, it is a public-private partnership whose mission is to increase incremental international visitation, spend, and market share in order to fuel the nation's economy and enhance the image of the USA worldwide. In this position, Karen is responsible for leading partner marketing efforts, as well as building global strategic alliances to leverage the combined resources and expertise of the industry. Her leadership includes development and oversight of all partner-driven marketing programs and key global media alliances that add and create value for partners, amplify their partners' international reach, and drive inbound international visitation and tourism dollars to the whole of the United States. In addition, Karen leads the organization's efforts to generate $100 million in annual contributions from organizations within and beyond the travel industry. An integral part of Karen's leadership includes working with the marketing teams and agencies in strategic development of the consumer and global marketing campaigns, while engaging the travel trade as well as broadcast, online, and other media advertising partners to enhance the message and reach worldwide. Let's just say she's exceedingly successful at her current gig. During the past 25 years, Karen has become globally recognized for creating value-driven marketing strategies that generate growth and drive business results. Over the course of her career, she's built a strong track record of success across a range of disciplines, from integrated marketing, communications, branding, and advertising, to strategic planning and execution, sponsorship, and partnership development. Prior to joining BrandUSA, Karen did all sorts of tremendous things for Meet Minneapolis, including being instrumental in helping that city win the bid to host the 2008 Republican National Convention. Karen directed all marketing and promotions for the Target Center, one of the top 5 highest revenue producing arenas in North America, and she simultaneously served as the executive director of the 1998 World Figure Skating Championships. An award-winning marketer, Karen has earned buckets and buckets of honors from a whole host of organizations, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing her this afternoon. Rosalina Barba-Stefano is the Director of Consumer Research for BrandUSA. She joined the BrandUSA team in June 2018 to manage the consumer research and metrics programs that measure the effectiveness of marketing efforts at BrandUSA. She was previously at NYC & Company, the destination marketing organization for the city of New York. During her 6-year tenure at NYC & Company, Rosina designed and managed the organization's market research programs. Prior to joining NYC & Company, Rosina was a partner at GM Bikes in Hialeah, Florida, and was a research associate at New Link Group in Miami, where she conducted and executed brand and marketing studies. Rosina was born and raised in Colombia, giving her the very cool accent you'll hear shortly. She holds a bachelor's and not one, but two master's degrees, and is a pretty all-round dynamic human. If you have questions for Karen or Rosina, please drop them in the chat box as they move through their presentations. I'll do my best to field those questions during the time we've got allotted today. If, however, we can't answer your question, not that I can imagine that ever happening with these two at the mic, but the Go West folks will pull those questions together and ask Karen and Rosina to provide answers, and they'll get those back to you in writing via email as quickly as possible. And now, Karen, Ms. Grunberg, it is my pleasure to turn the microphone over to you and to Rosina. In the meantime, I'm going to shut off my camera so I don't cause any interference. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everybody. I have a little history here. Go West was my very first event I attended when I joined BrandUSA. And it was at the very, very beginning. It was February of 2012. And we
Oh my gosh.
meeting with all of you, and I had over 100 meetings, and I didn't know what we were going to be doing. So it was a real listening session. But coming out of that meeting really helped me to understand what we needed to do to support our industry partners, because that's what this is all about. Without the work we do with you, without your support, we would not exist, because we're such a unique partnership. I also have to say, Julie, that I'm kind of in this industry because of you. Earlier, I met with you and Helen Morano when I had first moved to DC, and you kind of just told me I'd really be good at this. So hopefully I have been. I want to thank you for that. And I'm going to introduce Rosina in a couple of minutes, but I'm just going to give you kind of an overview. As many of you have joined our global marketplace or listened to some of our webinars, the economic impact of what is going on is still very much up in the air for change and growth and definitive. When are we going to launch in the market? And we know that, but we have been working on making sure that we are in a state of readiness, that we have a series of quick to market programs to share with partners. So as soon as we can start marketing again, we can work on that. We've also set our criteria of when we're going to consider re-entering markets, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I want to go on to the next slide and kind of talk top line tourism from our tourism economics. Many of you joined a webinar at the end of January with Carol Ream, our Vice President of Analytics, who's recently left us to start her own organization. And on that call, I was reviewing her video and some of the things she was sharing with us then, such as Canada would be the first country to be totally inoculated. And everything is constantly changing so quickly. Using Canada as an example, they went from being perceived a month ago as being one of the first countries totally inoculated to now they're way behind in inoculations. So we encourage you to listen to our various webinars and information. Rosina has updated this information for this presentation. So I'm just going to share some top line tourism impact numbers that I think are important to us to consider. As you look at this slide, what you can see, which is really important, is that we are comparing our growth over the next few years to that of the 2019 levels. And what you can see is Europe, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East are going to go back to 19 levels sooner than we are and start to exceed those 2019 travel levels. We're going to not see that until really 2024, the growth. We'll get back to the 19 levels probably in 2023, but it is going to take a few more years to do that. And I think that's important for us to know. So in doing so, from a BrandUSA perspective, we are planning accordingly to be sure we're spending in the right markets at the right time, at the right scale. If you can go on to the next slide. When we look at the global trend spend by segments, this is really important. As I think you all know, domestic leisure tourism is going to come back first, even over domestic business tourism. We're seeing the growth of 19 levels starting in 2022 next year. But when it comes to international leisure business, we're not going to really see the growth beyond the 19 levels until 2024. We should sometime in 2023 see us max that level and get us to the 19 levels. But international business and tourism is also going to grow even slower. International business for tourism, yes, will grow slower. So if we go on to the next slide, I just want to add, as you look at the recovery, what will be favored in quicker recovery will be large domestic and regional markets. As you look at where the US lands here, short haul marketing and domestic will lead our recovery. But what's also interesting in digging into this data a little further is it really depends on the destinations themselves. If they are really a leisure market, they will see growth more quickly than if they're really a business market. So we will see some growth in certain cities and destinations much more quickly than we will in others. So I just want to share that that is really what our economic impact is as of today. We do continuously follow up on this, and we'll continue to have webinars because the world is changing so rapidly. I want to now turn this over to Rosina, who is going to share with you our most recent sentiment studies, because that's telling a more important story for us right now. Thanks, Rosina.
Thank you, Karen. Next slide. Okay, I would like to present some of the highlights of our latest monthly tracking study of travel consumer sentiment, as Karen said, which we started tracking back in March of last year. And you might have seen this in previous presentations where, as Karen mentioned, Carol Rim was presenting as part of our webinars. However, in addition to this tracking study, between September and November, we added some new questions to address this new phase of the pandemic with the announcement of the vaccine. So the idea was to understand how this will start changing things. But before we go into these questions, let's get over some of the basics. Next slide. You might have seen this graph, and this might be familiar because we've been using it for quite some time. This is the likelihood to travel internationally in the next 12 months compared to 2019 levels as the baseline. Not surprisingly, there has been a significant drop in almost all the markets, but especially in Japan and Korea. The emerging markets like India and Mexico have tended to be more optimistic. And as you can see, India more so than Mexico. And India's optimism has even increased as months pass by. Mexico, on the other side, has stayed around the same levels all these months that we've been tracking, which, as you can see, it's still low compared to where the other markets are standing. But similar to Mexico, the intent to travel in those other markets that we're tracking has remained relatively the same. Bigger drops though, which it's unfortunately, but not surprising, but they have stayed pretty static since the virus surge last spring. However, unfortunately, we're seeing an uptick in pessimism in the last couple of months in Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Japan, and the UK. That being said, I do anticipate that those timelines for vaccination rollouts get more developed in all those countries, that most likely we will start to see some more positive changes as it relates to this intent to travel internationally. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, done. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to go back and forth between those who are considering a trip in the next 12 months and those who are not. First, let's talk about those who are considering an international trip and when they're planning to take those trips. Few markets like Australia, South Korea, Brazil, Japan, and Canada are still pushing it all the way to the end of the year. And this, in a sense, shows that sort of pessimism I was talking to you about in the previous slide. On the positive note, we're seeing some summer travel planning in Brazil, China, France, Germany, and the UK. However, the European countries, as you might know, it's a different category. Yes, we're seeing those peaks in July and August, which is their traditional big leisure travel season in these markets, but we have to think Europe in a different proposition, because due to the proximity to the other countries in the region and the possibility to drive across the borders, puts the idea of an international trip in another perspective, and not necessarily on getting on a plane and travel for 6 or 7 hours. In the short term, we know geography is going to play a significant role in this planning section, even more than before the pandemic. Next slide. Now let's talk about those that are not planning a trip in the next 12 months, and why not? What are their inhibitors? Not surprisingly, the main reason are COVID related. Travel restrictions, concerns about contracting or spreading the virus, as well as not being able to fully experience the destination as some activities are currently not open or might not be available due to the virus. However, in markets like Brazil and India, financial aspects are playing a role. Either they can't afford the trip this year or they're uncertain about their financial future. In both countries, the share of people selecting those financial obstacles is as high as those that are concerned about travel restrictions due to the pandemic. This, as you know, might become an issue, and it will be an issue that we are going to be faced with as those economic challenges might surge. And they're just as concerning and as problematic as the prospects when planning an international leisure travel as those related to the virus, and how people would be adjusting to those their travel plans. We're going to keep monitoring this economic hurdles, as it might not be isolated to only these countries, but other markets are most likely going to experience these ones as well. And this would be a key topic as we start working on those recovery plans and what will be the right proposition when it comes to time to market in those particular countries. Next slide. And now let's go back to talk about those that are planning a trip and how they're adjusting their plans. Across the board, when it comes to what changes they are making to that next trip, when thinking about that next international trip, we've been tracking this since we started in March. And in the last couple of months, we haven't seen much of changes related to this. But at the beginning, of course, we were seeing a high share of those that had not made changes yet, but they were willing to adjust if necessary. And that, of course, was due to the uncertainty when the pandemic surged. As that share starts going down, travelers in these countries are considering traveling as planned with precautions, mainly in Brazil, China, India, and Mexico. However, and it's something that we are going to keep monitoring, it's the postponing of the trip has picked up in the last couple of months at a higher degree in Japan and Korea, which correlates in a sense with the pessimism levels that we saw in the intent to travel that I talked to you about earlier. But interestingly, we're seeing a slight uptick in postponing the trip in France, Germany, and the UK. We need to keep in mind that there is a different perspective when we look at each market individually. So when we think about recovery and how to plan for it, we need to keep in mind the traveler's mindset and be critically important to be attuned with each market at specific perspective. Because as you see, all these markets behave differently. We cannot have an one-fit-all approach for each one of these markets. Next slide. Still talking about those that intend to travel internationally, let me talk to you about what they're considering important when they're deciding where to go. Among all these markets, resting and relaxing is the most popular consideration when deciding where to go internationally. Yes, we all want to relax. We all want just to have a break from our normal routines. In markets like India, Germany, Mexico, and China, connecting with nature is very important. Whereas in Brazil, China, India, and Mexico, increasing knowledge of other cultures make it to the top of the list. However, it is very important, and I can certainly relate to this, it's the engaging the children in activities, meaning this family travel has been over-indexing in all these months that we started this tracking when compared those levels to where they were in 2019. And it, in a sense, it totally makes sense. It's because this important segment of parents who have kids at home and they have been having them all this time with them at home with remote schooling and all of that, what they want now is to take a break and to take their kids out and take a break as well. Next slide. Now, let me talk about this new questions that I mentioned at the beginning. This new research addresses the different aspects of the new wave of the challenges that the pandemic and coming back to some sort of reality is facing, and what consumers feel that they need as part of what they would need to make them feel safe, and what are the actual restrictions or requirements and a standpoint of like traveling again. First, we talk about those necessities consumers are expecting and what it's making an overseas travel decision. I want to do a caveat here. This next questions are slightly different than the ones we had been setting up through the entire tracking and since we started. These new questions, and it was a need from the Department of Commerce, it's to understand the overseas travel for most of these markets. Of course, we address the international piece for Canada and Mexico due to that proximity to the United States. But we wanted to start understanding what would it mean for people to get on a plane and most likely get to the US. So here, this is the requirements consumers feel they need to be in place for them to feel safe. We wanted to understand what would make them feel comfortable to travel again, to make that overseas travel. What we define as overseas travel is for them to get out of their region. So for Europe countries, is to get out of Europe. Across the board, having air passenger requirements and screening in place, like temperature checks, is the main need right now, mainly in Brazil, China, India, Mexico, and the UK, whereas social distancing stands out in Brazil, China, India, Mexico, and the UK. That being said, it's not that as part of this study, they're selecting only one of these reasons, they're selecting more than one of these reasons. However, for the purpose of this tracking, we did include a mutually exclusive option, which is that they would not travel until the pandemic is over, and Japan strikes out as the outlier. If you look at Japan's brownish bar, there's a high share of those saying that they will not travel until the pandemic is over, which means that there are definitely more risk adverse than a lot of those other markets. There is significant share, but not as high as Japan, but accounting for almost a third as well in Australia, Canada, and Germany. Now, even with the news of the vaccine and the vaccination rollouts have started, the response has not been as high as a lot of people were expecting. However, we're starting to see a change a bit. For example, France, when we started tracking this back in September, these necessities, was sort of the least vaccination centric compared to the other 10 markets we tend to track, with only 10% selecting vaccination back in September. But in the last couple of months, this share has gone up to over a third. And we will see this coming up in a lot of the markets, and we're seeing it now in Germany, the UK, Canada, and Brazil. Interestingly, and very different to the other markets, in Japan, it has gone down from almost 40% in September and October to around 20% in the last 2 months. Next slide. Again, the previous slide was about the things consumer express as requirement for them to feel safe to take an overseas trip and international trip for the Canadians and the Mexicans. But now this slide, I want you to focus on all the other things travelers have to deal with in terms of requirements and restrictions that are not necessarily things that they are looking forward to. We have call out a set of requirements that have been set up by governments and like the industry itself to keep it safe. And there's an overwhelming sort of response, and it's not surprising that the 14-day quarantine in destination, it's the biggest issue, with roughly 50% of the people in each market saying that the quarantine will be a deal breaker for them. Because there's not even that much time for vacation if you have a 14-day quarantine. Germany and France, that share is even slightly higher than the 50% that strikes on the other markets. The second biggest issue is submitting to and pay for pre-boarding testing, either at any airport. And as you might understand, it becomes a financial issue as it starts adding up. And it would add up way more quickly if you were traveling with family, because it's per person. In certain markets, the idea of the quarantine, even in a shorter version with a negative test, it's still an issue. Look at France, Germany, and Japan. Mainly, as I said before, because of the length of their trip is not as long, and even if they were only 5 days, it will be an issue. India, for example, I want to highlight as a particular case, and almost 1/3 said they had an issue with an indoor gathering with other family members. And this, we understand that it's because they skew high on visiting friends and family, and they stayed for a longer period of times, but they are, the idea is to get together with other families in that destination. And it was interesting to see that they also have an issue with sharing personal contact information for tracing purposes. For sure, we're going to continue monitoring this as these markets as we continue working in the recovery plans. This study gets launched, and we're very happy to be able to do that every month. And it would be, you would see some of these results in what the new dashboard that we've developed. With that, I want to pause and I will pass it along back to Karen, who will be talking to you about this new dashboard.
Great, thank you, Rosina. And I've seen some of the questions come in, so we've talked to a couple of these. So we'll share that information with you. If you go to the next slide, I just want to share, based on the request by our partners, we have been working on building out a COVID-19 dashboard that is available on our site at BrandUSA.com. And Rosina and her team are maintaining it on a weekly and monthly basis. And we have set together some criteria about when we would return to market. So we're tracking that. We're tracking information that may help you make some decisions. So I encourage you to look at that. I know coming up, we will also be adding more information about the vaccine and how it is being impacted and how it's being distilled in different markets. In the meantime, if you want to follow that along, one of the best resources I found is in Bluebird Media. They have a great tracking system that they share on a daily, weekly basis. I just want to add that we're still on a holding pattern before we can actively launch our marketing efforts, although we continue to work in the area of training, educating, engaging with our tour operators and travel agents, and we're going to continue to do more of those programs so we do remain top of mind. I'm going to turn this over now for questions, but also know from many of you that you work with our teams, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or reach out to you to give you any of this information you need in more detail from your planning perspective. So I want to say thank you, and I'm going to turn this back to Julie to open it for questions.
Okay, so while you guys were giving us great information, we did have a couple questions, so I'm going to start with those, and that'll give other people an opportunity to chime in and ask their questions in the chat box. Rosina, specifically for you, Tony Lyle points out that international travel should start coming back later this year, and then will continue to grow until 2025 when it may exceed 2019 levels. He feels like this is an important point, particularly for people who are looking at their 22 budgets. Can you give a little more context for the recovery timeline that you've presented?
We have been using the timeline that based on tourism economics pipeline, and what they're saying is it's going to start in 2021, 2022, but we're not going to see any of those 2019 levels until 2023 and 2024, as Karen actually was showing on those slides, and for us specifically in the international perspective for BrandUSA, it's going to take longer than 2021 and 2022, and we understand that because as people start getting more comfortable about traveling, for sure they're not going to get into a long haul travel. They're just going to go slowly, I guess, and secure into those domestic travel or even regional travel. And that is something we understand about that.
But to Tony's point, I just want to add one thing to Tony's point. We're still going to start seeing international travel later this year at some point, and it's just the growth is going to be slower than it is from other countries. But that's also, we have, if you think about it, a lot of our short haul, not our long haul destinations, the Canada and Mexico will grow back first. And what we look at also is air flights and such from other markets. So we are already working in those markets. We actually have plans to roll out for Canada and Mexico soon. We're talking to our partners who've already signed up for them, and we will continue to work on that. We're also working on plans in Europe to make sure we're in front of those tour operators now with the information. But Tony's right, it's going to begin this year, later this year, but it's going to take a while for us to get to this levels of above the 2019 levels.
Thanks. Karen, you invoked Helen Morano's name earlier, so of course she had to chime in with a question. She said she's of the opinion that we shouldn't be trying to get back to 2019 levels. She's kind of hoping that maybe as a result of all that has happened, perhaps we start looking at success through revenues, and then move to social impacts of international visitors on a community. So for instance, maybe start talking about quality of travelers and instead of quantity of travelers. Are you guys, is BrandUSA looking at that in any way?
Well, our first recovery will be we're focused on the travelers who will come back and the quality of who could give us the biggest return, because that's where the dollar, to Helen's point, that's where the dollars will increase. The numbers will increase at a later date. So when we go back into market, Helen, we're going to be really focused on the audiences that will return quickly, and they're usually, they're different in every market. You know, in our next summit that we're going to do on the UK and Ireland, we're going to talk about both student travelers and luxury travelers as how we market to those consumers.
So speaking about specific segments then, Karen, let me segue to another question, and that is, has come in. What are the travel protocols under which, what are the travel protocols under the new normal, which are to be implemented for like FITs and groups and MICE travelers? Do you know?
Well, it changes per market and per country. And so we are working on making sure that we're working with the individual consulates and all of that to make those decisions and to put that information out there. Great,
great. Rosina, Japan has, someone noted that Japan, in the slides that you were showing, has a very low percentage on most of the measures of necessities for travel. Does this imply that they feel less safe to travel, or do you feel that it's something else?
I think they do feel less safe to travel, because we even had a higher share of those that said that they're not going to be traveling until the pandemic is over. I think they're more averse, and they're very specific in certain things, that anything that's disrupt that safety for them, they just bucked up until they feel things are the right way. And the pandemic, it's not going to be a different way for them to do that. So yes, they're way less risk averse than the other markets we've been tracking.
Okay. Here's a question I don't know the answer to, and I probably should, so that's my bad. But maybe Karen, you or Rosina do, or can help me. It says, do you know of any plans to create health passports for inbound and outbound travel so that people who are vaccinated don't need to quarantine and present tests?
I know, all I can say is I know there are conversations going on. I'm smiling because we talk about it, we just don't know where that's going to lead to. It changes again from day to day.
Yeah. Rosina, back to you. I've had two questions now on where are you getting that information that you are presenting? Where's your data come from?
The data comes from a study we do with engine panels. This is part of an omnibus study that is custom to a set of questions we've set up. And we do it on a monthly basis. This is a panelist in each one of those countries. We survey around 1,000 per market. This is general population in the majority of the cases. However, we do ask them about the intent to travel in the next 12 months, and we use that to filter those more travel-oriented consumers in each one of those markets.
Okay. Either of you, do you have a handle on how we are managing visitors that might like to come but have to deal with quarantine rules?
I think that's out of our purview to be able to really address something like that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, from the federal perspective, I would just say, we are working really closely with all of the federal partners on all of those kinds of, I sort of bigger picture questions. And we just don't really have, I don't believe we have really come to any workable, I don't want to say any solutions that that are blanket solution kind of things. That as I think Karen said earlier, it's by market, and I think that's true. Lisa Simon is reminding us, and I will say this for you guys, you can hear more about global health passport activities on tomorrow's session, which is called Restoring Traveler Confidence with WTTC's Global Safe Seamless Traveler Journey Protocols. And also, again, on Wednesday during the session that's entitled Technology Trends and Standards Shaping Post-Pandemic Travel. So there you go. See, we don't need to know everything because Lisa and her teams are going to know everything when they get their chance tomorrow and again on Wednesday. So that, oh wait, I've got one more question.
Jennifer, I see Jennifer, you're back. Welcome back. But
well, there you go. Yeah, Rosina, she's saying one of the slides indicated India as the most optimistic country to travel internationally. Was the question in the survey specific to travel to the US or just travel international, which obviously could be anywhere?
Yes, it's only international and most likely it would be regional for them, but they tend to be more optimistic than the other markets we track. But that being said, their optimism levels have gone up as they get closer to what that baseline of 2029 intent to travel we had been seeing when we've been tracking this before the pandemic.
Okay. I don't have any more questions in the queue. I don't have any more questions in the Q&A box. Oh, of course, now I said that and there is one. So hang on a sec. Let me get that one pull up. Oh, do markets have, this is from Ana Laura, do markets have distinct geographical preferences when considering coming to the US? For instance, do Australians prefer our East Coast over the West Coast?
The answer is yes, they do. And I smile at that because we were just having a conversation about that. So part of our marketing efforts are really looking in the market as to what are the preferences and making sure we're marketing to that. I will also say, the Telegraph in the UK every once in a while sends us a survey of what is being explored through their travel sites. And about a month ago, Wyoming popped up for a whole month every week that people were looking for the great outdoors, and they were really looking for those things to explore. So throughout the world, people are looking for different things, but we're pretty in tune to what each country needs right now.
And I would say just, oh, hang on. Here we've got another question.
From Sue.
They're asking for more specifics. Can you share the destination preferences for each country? That would be a whole session on its own. Rosina, do you want to direct people maybe to the website? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think it would be a better way to address that question, because otherwise, as you say, it would be at least another 45 minutes to talk about each one of these 11 markets.
Although I'm not here to pitch this, is when we do the focus on events for each of the markets on the global marketplace, we are talking about that. So you get a little bit more specifics, and we're doing it from inside the market, from either with travel agents or tour operators and things like that. So it's good if you're part of that, come join us.
Rosina, another question from Jennifer. She's suggesting that maybe the survey could ask travelers what is the longest haul travel they would be willing to do.
That's an interesting question. We would consider it as part of when we keep developing this study. But the idea when we started this study was to understand if they were taking into consideration the limitations, if they were getting out of their country anyway. So this is where we've been focusing on, for them to feel kind of like, for us to have a pulse of when they are doing. We do have a quarterly tracker where we ask this same, not same group, but this type of population, if their intent to travel to the US. And we do that on a quarterly basis as part of another study.
Also, I would just mention that the National Travel and Tourism Office also has individual sector market profiles that are up and available on our website. And I know BrandUSA also has sector profiles on their website if you want to really dive deep into a particular country. Also, for our part, you can always call me, and I can connect you to our brilliant economist, Mark Brown, who can slice and dice and slice and dice and slice and dice data 16 ways from Sunday. So if you've got a particular market that you're interested in and you want to know a little bit more or a lot more, I'm happy to connect you to Mark. I would also say, just to remind you guys, that on the federal side, the Federal Aviation Administration has put up a website called flyhealthy.gov. And you can get a lot of information there about traveling and what's required and what you have to know before you go and what you have to do on the plane and what you have to do after you get off the plane and all that kind of stuff. So in addition to the two terrific sessions I know you're going to have tomorrow and Wednesday with Lisa and the IITA group in concert with the Go West group, you can, in the short term, before you get all smart with Lisa's two sessions later this week, you can go check the flyhealthy.gov website, and what pops up I think is really is good information, and they are working very hard to keep that up to date. So I don't see anything else. So let me just thank you both, Karen and Rosina, very much for taking the time to chat with the guys at Go West. I love the fact that we got to go first. We're the first out of the box for Education Week. So I hope we have set the good table. We've set a good standard, and that everybody will have terrific education sessions this week before you jump into your super important appointments next week. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. And stay safe, stay healthy, be well.
See you all soon.
Thank you, guys. Bye.